What?
South.
Or what Canada's up here? What type of people live, are going to live in those areas is my point. Farmers. So do you think Federalists are going to be in favor of that? No, because who's making the money there? Farmers. Okay? There's more power being given to farmers. Remember, Federalists are the elitists. So the Federalists objected to the addition of Canada and Florida and northern Alabama because it's certainly going to strengthen the power of the farmers. Who are what party? Republicans, okay? Now, when you have a war and people within your country are very opposed to it, does that strengthen or weaken your war effort? Weakens it badly. And the people who spoke out against the war didn't call it the War of 1812, they called it Mr. Madison. So people that spoke out against it, obviously mostly Federalists, didn't even refer to the War of 1812 as the War of 1812. They referred to it as, quote, Mr. Madison's War. Now, to be quite fair with you, it wasn't only Federalists that opposed the war. Most of the people that opposed the war were Federalists. However, there were some Republicans who even doubted the actions of President Madison and the War of 1812. So he did have some dissent among his own party on this deal as well. Okay? It was not popular. Now, think about our history. What did we do? What are some of the actions Congress took during the Jefferson administration? What's one thing it did that would affect the War of 1812? Yeah, they decreased funding in the military, in the Army and Navy, right? So we're not prepared for war. And I'm going to give you 4 examples of why we had a lack of preparation. Okay? Lack of preparation. First of all, I've already mentioned. What's the first thing you do when you have to have a war? You got to have a strategy, right? How do you come up with a strategy, number one, if you've got mixed feelings on the war in the first place? So there was the first reason why we weren't prepared for war, is we couldn't come up with a military strategy that anybody favored as a group because of the discontent on the war. So the mixed feelings across the country made it very difficult to find a war strategy that anyone favored. Okay? That was one big reason why we were not prepared for war. Okay, let's talk about our Navy. The British had about 800 ships in their Navy. Guess how many we had? 12.
Solid.
We had 12 to their 800. Okay? The U.S. Army had less than 7,000 troops. And what were their commanders? What type of people were the commanders now? Yeah, well, the third one is we only had 7,000 troops. But they were being commanded by what type of commanders? What? Old. From what? What's the last thing they commanded? Revolutionary War. So you had only 7,000 American troops who were commanded by elderly Revolutionary War veterans who really weren't functional. Okay? Very good. They're old. And the fourth thing that helped our lack of preparation is, what do you have to do to get your army prepped? You have to appoint what? An overall commander to command the forces. Because that overall commander has got to direct the war effort. He's got to train the troops, equip the troops. Somebody has to stand to the forefront and say, I'm in charge and this is what we're doing. Madison failed to appoint an overall commander in this war effort, which meant that our troops are going to be poorly trained, maybe not equipped the way they should be, and no one's directing the war effort.
How many troops did
We had 7,000, yeah.
Great Britain?
Well, I don't know. We went many more than that. Okay, that then will take us to our next subtopic, which is black soldiers and sailors. What are we going to have to depend upon a little bit since we're short? Blacks, okay? Black soldiers and sailors. Now let me ask you a question. There wasn't much effort to recruit blacks. Matter of fact, there was only one state that passed a law to raise black troops to help. What state would that be? New York. So they didn't make a huge effort to recruit blacks for this war. The only state that passed a law to help recruit blacks into the armed services was New York. Yet many, many took part, even though they weren't recruited. Why would you do that? Freedom. Many men, goodwill, many slaves or black men volunteered to help, hoping that if they won the war, they would. Now, on the other hand of that, there were a few blacks that served where? Great Britain. Why? Thinking that if Great Britain won, they would get freedom. So, not a lot, but please know that there were black slaves that volunteered on both sides, hoping the winner would give them freedom. Fortunately for us, most sided on the American side. Now, I don't know, I'm kind of going to go through this, not in a whole lot of detail for time, but you know what the main thing that happened in Washington, D.C. during the War of 1812? Anybody know that? Burnt down the White House. And also it made siege on what? The Capitol. You can still see bullet marks from the War of 1812 at the Capitol, where you'll get a chance to see that. Okay? So there were some sieges going on in Washington, D.C. The British actually seized Washington, D.C., set fire to the Capitol, and put siege upon, set fire to the White House, and set siege to the Capitol. And you can still see bullet marks in the walls, part of the walls of the Capitol from the War of 1812. We'll show you that in about a year or so. Now, what other city near Washington, D.C. might fear they're going to be seized? What? Close? Another big city? Philadelphia. And what happened is when Washington, D.C. was seized, American leaders in Philadelphia, also fearing they might be seized, appealed to local blacks, and 2,500 responded to help hold off the British in Philadelphia. So 2,500 blacks responded to the appeal of leaders of Philadelphia because they were afraid they were going to be the next city to be sieged. So 25 African Americans or black slaves came to the rescue, so to speak, in helping Philadelphia remain secure.
Wait, 2,500?
2,500, yeah. Now, what was the concern here about having blacks join the cause? What didn't they really want to do? Because they're slaves. Arm them. Right. Well, the man that broke that tradition first was General Andrew Jackson in Louisiana. And he ignored the fear that many white officers had in arming black troops. So he was among the first to arm black troops in Louisiana, because the fight's down there also. Matter of fact, Jackson not only armed blacks, he paid them the same as what? White soldiers, yeah. This was uncalled for at the time. So not only did Jackson arm black soldiers, which most white officers would have never done, he also paid them the same salary as he paid white soldiers. That tells you how much confidence Andrew Jackson had. There was another commander in the War of 1812, Captain Oliver H. Perry. And he wrote in his journals about blacks under his command. After the war was over, he wrote in his journals on how it went, or even during the war he wrote in his journals about his experience with black soldiers. So Captain Oliver H. Perry wrote in his journals about blacks under his command. And he stated, quote, "They seemed absolutely insensible to danger." He said they seemed absolutely insensible to danger. What's that mean? No fear. No fear. So, they contributed tremendously. They were very, very brave in the War of 1812. The black soldiers helped us in this war, in its result. Yet, How many do you think, after it was over, ever received freedom? Very few. Very few that fought received the freedom they sought. Did anybody guarantee them that? That's just what they thought would happen. So despite their contributions and bravery, very few slaves who fought in the war were granted their freedom. Okay, that'll take us to our next subtopic then, which is the War of 1812 ends in a stalemate. What's a stalemate? Say tie. Or that nobody wins, it's a tie. So a stalemate. Guys that fought in the Korean War, and they also fought in the Vietnam War, sometimes refer to their military record as 0-1-1, which means 0 wins, 1 loss. Where? Vietnam, and 1 tie. Korea. Yeah. So we're not used to having stalemates, but this is our first stalemate. Now, the United States really struggled those first 2 years of war in the War of 1812. We struggled big time. As I mentioned, the British actually occupied the nation's capital at Washington, D.C. at one time. They seized it and occupied it. They burned several buildings in Washington, including the Capitol. Did damage to the White House. I mean, they were kicking our rear early in this war. They were taking the federal government. But we fought back. And we had 3 very important victories in other areas of the nation during the War of 1812 that's going to lead us to this stalemate. Okay? So I'm going to tell you about 3 really important victories we had in the War of 1812 that led us to this stalemate. The first one was the Battle of Lake Erie in 1813. The Battle of Lake Erie in 1813. Big victory for us. Where's Lake Erie? Right here. So what are we fighting for in here?
Alabama.
That's Canada. What do you say?
The Northern Alabama?
Yeah, we're right close to there. We'll talk about that in a minute. Lake Erie was to try to secure those Canadian lands, okay? Well, the man that commanded American forces was Captain Oliver Perry and his naval force. And it basically closed down the border between what? Canada and the United States. Britain wasn't going to get down in here to get after us. Because what they were trying to do is they were trying to come here and just crush us in this area here. So this Battle of Lake Erie was important because it halted the northern assault. The plan was to come just like this. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay? So the Battle of Lake Erie in 1813, led by Captain Oliver Perry and his naval force, was a crucial victory, and it closed down the Canadian-American border. And you'll find out why that was important more tomorrow, maybe today. Okay, the second battle was the Battle of Lake Champlain in 1814. And Lake Champlain was captured by Captain Thomas MacDonough and his troops. Captain Thomas MacDonough and his troops. And that did the same thing, is it kept the British, remember where Lake Champlain was? Where's that at? New York, right? It kept the British from penetrating the United States northward. So that was a big victory. Okay? The Battle of Lake Champlain, 1814. Lake Champlain was captured by Thomas MacDonough and his troops, and it prevented a British invasion of the United States from where? Canada. Now, the next battle is the most important of the War of 1812 because it prevents a British assault from where? The south. And it was called the Battle of New Orleans. Battle of New Orleans. Okay? Now, this is a big one, and what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you about it tomorrow, and then we're going to watch a short video on it, and then we're going to move on to the Treaty of Ghent on Wednesday. So tomorrow we'll talk specifically about the Battle of New Orleans. Who's the commander at the Battle of New Orleans? Andrew Jackson. And this is where he gets a lot of his, what I would call publicity. And part of this is going to help him become what someday? President. Okay, Brooke's back there messing up my video.
Why not?
Sending a message to Bailey Gibbons. Bailey, I don't know what you're doing, but you better get
She's
here tomorrow.
sick.
Sick is no excuse, baby.
Oh,